endlessly searching for an original sin.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Sweet Pool. Getting closer and closer to the end if it weren't for worse. Tetsuo parked the car outside a familiar white apartment complex. His guess had been right. Tetsuo had brought him home. Yuji climbed out of the car. It felt like forever since he'd last seen the place. Tetsuo's face was ashen. His breathing had not improved. Using each other for support, they managed to climb the stairs to Yuji's apartment. The moment they opened the door, they realized that they weren't alone. The lights were off, but they could see something wriggling in the hallway. They felt no surprise. They knew what this was. Their bodies could sense it. Sure enough, they were here. It seemed that they would follow Yuji wherever he went, or perhaps his host body summoned them somehow. Yuji walked down the hallway, purposely crushing the flesh underfoot. Perhaps part of him wanted them to die. Together, he and Tetsuo entered the bedroom and collapsed onto the bed. A dark red stain began to spread over the dark bed sheets. The aquarium light was still on, but the water was too cloudy to see inside. More flesh lumps were scattered around the room. Yuji didn't care. He turned his body to face Tetsuo. It occurred to him that this was Tetsuo's first time visiting his room. If only they had met under normal circumstances. If only they could have lived ordinary lives. Maybe then they could have hung out with here as friends. The image brought a flutter of regret. Perhaps things might have turned out differently if only he'd chosen a different road. Was he foolish for clinging to what might have been?
もし
He began to whisper.
もし俺たちがこんな風にならずにごく普通の学生として生きてたら、
Staring up at the ceiling, Tetsuo replied.
今さら考えることじゃねえだろ。そうか。そうだよな。
It was pointless. He knew that. So why couldn't he stop? Gingerly, Tetsuo sat up and climbed on top of Yuji. Though his doubts still lingered, Yuji wound his arms around Tetsuo's body. Tetsuo, hiking up Yuji's sweater vest, began unbuttoning his dress shirt. The other man's hands were rough and warm against his skin. It was soothing, and yet it fell off somehow. Was he nervous? To distract himself, he began to rub Tetsuo's back. Once his shirt was completely unbuttoned, Yuji pulled it and his vest off and tossed him to the floor. Then he began to undo his pants. Tetsuo pulled his clothes off as well. Soon they were both naked. Yuji's gaze shifted to Tetsuo's abdomen, and his eyes went wide. There was a swollen black protrusion about the size of a fist jutting from his stomach. Thick, veiny lines ran between it and the wound on his flank. It was throbbing so hard he could practically hear it. Yuji's sense of wrongness suddenly swelled. He didn't know why, but he felt afraid.
痛くはないのか。ああ。
Tetsuo shook his head as he slid his fingers gently down Yuji's chest. There was a similar protrusion on Yuji's chest as well. It wasn't as pronounced as Tetsuo's, but it throbbed in time with his heartbeat. As his doubts continued to swell, Yuji frowned.
怖いのか。
Tetsuo seemed to have caught this shift in his expression. He couldn't answer. He didn't know how he felt. Then, as if to reassure him, Tetsuo pulled him into a tight embrace. This brought a faint swell of relief. Their faces drew close and they kissed. As their passions deepened, Tetsuo's hands began to wander Yuji's body. His movements were gentle, yet at the same time fanned Yuji's unease. His heart was pounding, and not from excitement. He struggled to keep his voice contained. He knew that he should be enjoying Tetsuo's touch, but he just couldn't give himself over to the moment. His rational mind refused to disengage. Tetsuo pulled out of the kiss. He looked at Yuji and smiled, but Yuji could tell that it was forced. He felt terrible, but he couldn't help it. He couldn't shake his doubts and fears. Part of him was rejecting Tetsuo. He heard a noise at the front door. Tetsuo turned to look and Yuji followed suit. Was someone else here?
やっぱりここか。
Dude, we were just about to get it on. The bedroom door swung open. Kitani stood there, pistol in hand. Yuji felt the blood drain from his face.
どうして一度お前を送り届けたことがある。覚えてないかもしれないがな。
Wait, was he talking about the time Yuji had woken up in the trash pile? It was right after Zenya had kidnapped them.
心当たりはここしか知らない。もしダメだったら他を探すしかないと思っていたんだが、大当たりだったな。
Kitani stepped into the room, gun thrust out in front of him, his face twisted with hatred.
バキ者め。
Kitani spat the words at them, then put his finger on the trigger. After that, everything happened in slow motion. There was a flash of blinding light, and the roar that swallowed the worlds. The lance of scorching heat stabbed into Yuji's torso, tearing the skin, crushing muscle, and shattering bones. It pierced his heart clean through. Tetsuo collapsed on top of him. He could feel blood spreading across his stomach. The wound was blistering hot. His skin was melting. The heat spread through his whole body, consuming him from within. Strangely, there was no pain, just heat, like stepping into a sauna or volcano. As consciousness faded, Yuji searched for Tetsuo. His eyes found a shock of sandy brown hair, but Tetsuo's face was hidden from this angle. A quiet disappointment filled him. He just wanted to see Tetsuo's face. One last time. A year had passed since the tragedy.
それでは確かに受け取りました。ありがとうございます。
The man smiled the way Kitani imagined a snake might smile. In his hands was a fancy-looking old chest with a large quantity of equally old documents. Although Kitani recognized the man's voice, this was his first time actually seeing what he looked like. He studied the man carefully. His general demeanor suggested kindness and compassion, but the sharp light in his eyes gave him away. It had been 3 days since this man, Kamiya, had contacted him. When he identified himself as the one of the liberated, Kitani had thought that perhaps he'd misheard. It was a name that he'd never forgot. Instantly, it had summoned memories of the events that had taken place 1 year prior, and his chest tightened with bitter heartache. Kamiya had asked for the documents stored in the Okinaga family chapel, claiming that they were the property of his sect. Frankly, Kitani had been more than happy to oblige. He'd made plans to dispose of them in the past multiple times, but somehow had never quite been able to go through with it. Kamiya's request had been a perfect excuse. Once he'd agreed to return the documents, Kamiya had chosen the time and place for their meeting. The cerulean warbler, on the anniversary of the tragedy. Whether he'd chosen the day on purpose, Kitani had no way of knowing, Either way, it was his first return to the city in some time. Today, they were seated at the bar. Someone else had taken Katani's old spot. The bar's relaxing atmosphere was unchanged, but it felt like the customer's demographic was younger compared to when he'd frequented the place. Clearly, this was not Kamiya's first visit to the establishment, but while he appeared entirely at home here, he didn't quite blend in with the rest of the crowd. Perhaps it was because of the warbler's blue lighting making his smile seem even more mysterious. Kamiya carefully set the chest down on the empty stool beside him, then picked up his glass. Its contents matched Katani's right down to the shade of amber.
それで、何か聞きたいことはありますか？謝礼代わりと言ってはなんですけど、答えられる範囲なら何でもどうぞ。
Kamiya swirled his glass without taking a sip. Perhaps he was enjoying the clink of the ice. Katani considered his offer. Indeed, he had questions. He'd had a great many questions once, but time had replaced most of them with a dull resignation. He would stick to the few that still weighed on his mind.
あんた、本当は何者なんだ？
単刀直入な質問ですね。
Kamiya grinned.
以前にも申し上げましたが、私は自由なる民の一兄弟員に過ぎません。ですが、駒波学園に教師として勤務してました。崎山洋二君と白沼哲夫君のクラスを受け持ったこともあります。
あの二人の？
ええ。
Sakiyama Yuji, Shiranumura Tetsuo. No one had seen them since that fateful day. Kamiya had made sure of that.
あの二人もオスとメスだったんだろ？
He stared at his glass as he spoke. Kamiya smiled faintly.
そう。哲夫君はオスの中でも特に優秀な個体でしたよ。ここ数年でもトップクラスの。彼は生まれてすぐに捨てられた子供だった。3歳の時に養子として引き取られましたが、養父母に虐待されていた。彼に優秀なオスの兆候が現れたことを確認してから、我々教団は彼を引き取り、別の夫婦のもとへ送ったのです。
Abandoned at birth. The words struck a chord with Katani. He knew what it was like to be betrayed by one's parents.
洋二君はね、実に十数年ぶりに生まれた待望のメスでした。内なる存在の命が尽きようとしていた当時、新たなる指導者を生み出す可能性を持つのは、メスである彼しかいなかった。だから、オスは皆触発されて、彼に惹かれてしまったんですよ。善也君もね。
Katani's expression hardened. Ignoring it, Kamiya continued.
メスは人間にはわからない強烈なフェロモンを発する。けど、人間の男でも惑わされてしまう者がいたかもしれません。我々としては、洋二君は哲夫君のような優秀なオスと交わってほしかった。だから、そうなるように軽いお膳立てはしましたよ。同じクラスにしたりね。ただ、その後の二人の接触については、私は何もしていません。思った以上にうまくいきましたよ。結果は、失敗に終わりましたが。
Kamiya shrugged and took a sip of his drink.
聞いていいか？
はい。
坊ちゃん、前夜は自分のことを出来損ないだと言っていた。それはなぜだ？
The The word had remained a thorn in his heart ever since he'd first heard Xenia utter it. To this day, the memory continued to torment him.
神のご意志か、類まれなる偶然か。どういうわけだか、善也君の体には、沖永家が代々引き継いで守っていた内なる存在、御主様のかけらが入り込んでしまったんですよ。善也君がまだ赤子だった頃に、国人氏が食べさせたのではないか、という噂もありますが。
Katani looked sharply at Kamiya, but the other man smiled unapologetically.
内なる存在のかけらは強力だ。普通の宿肉の何十倍もね。だから、善也君は相性いかんにかかわらず、無理やりオスとして体を作り変えられてしまったんです。よほど相性が悪かったんでしょうね。不完全な個体になってしまった。国人氏が儀式だ、復活だと言っていたことを知っていますか？
ああ。
That was one detail he wasn't liable to forget.
いくら聖地へ内なる存在を連れて行こうとも、メスがいようとも、復活することなどありえなかった。
どういうことだ？
つまり、すべては彼の妄想だったんですよ。彼は、教団内でも少々問題視されていた。そういう意味でも。
Kamiya let out a long breath. His smile faded.
善也君は、本当に、かわいそうな子でした。
A sharp pain pierced Katani's chest. Try as he might to convince himself that it was all in the past, he still couldn't shake his regret. Katani would never forget Xenia's final moments. The look on his face, the sound of his voice, his last words.
それでは、私はそろそろこの辺で。
Katani grabbed the chest and his briefcase and got to his feet. He pulled out his wallet and set a wad of cash on the counter, far more than was necessary to cover his portion of the bill.
いや、こんなには。
いいんですよ。
Katani tried to return the money, but Kamiya had already started to walk off.
待ってくれ。
Seized by the impulse, he called out to the retreating figure. He had yet to ask the most pressing question.
最後に一つだけ聞きたい。
Kamiya turned back. He seemed surprised.
なんでしょ
う。内なる存在の正体は何なんだ？
Instantly, Kamiya's expression vanished. He lowered his chin with his middle finger pushed against his glasses up to hide his eyes.
秘密ですよ。ただ、我々はこれからも待ち続けます。新たなる始まりを。今日はありがとうございました。失礼します。
With a faint smile and a nod of his head, Kamiya turned and strolled out the door, a lightness in his step. Once he was gone, Katani picked up his glass. He wasn't sure how to feel about any of this. After the tragedy, he had left this town behind. The authorities had blamed the murders on gang activity, as the owner of the gun that had been fired at the scene, Katani had needed to make himself scarce. He told himself he'd never come back. But then, Kamiya had contacted him. Before coming here, Katani had stopped by the Okinaga family grave. He'd brought flowers for all three of them, Konohito, Xenia, and Xenia's mother. As he'd stood there in prayer, he thought back on old times, how every few months he and Conejito and Xenia would come to pay their respects. For a boy who never spoke about his mother, he had never missed a visit. It was the one time that Katani had known Xenia and his father to stand together side by side. He had always been fond of the moments they'd shared in front of her grave. No matter how damaged their relationship had been, the Okinagas were still a family in his eyes. Nothing would ever change that. Katani took a sip of the watery scotch and let the burn of the alcohol warm his memories of home. And that's it. Well, that isn't it. So we got the blue ending for this one. Maybe the red ending would have been happier. Maybe one day we'll find out. But for now, let's enjoy the music.
Every time he embraced, I heard to stare, laugh like her below. But you remember the madness in your side. I've dive been deep, now cried in the sky.
There are a lot. Oh, and then the love one. You know what? Oh, you can't skip this. Well, somebody had to thank vodka in the game eventually. Who knew it would be this one? For real, thank you guys for joining me for this entire series. I hope Jazz continues to bring out some great games here in America. Thank you for publishing it. And I thank you all for watching this series. I know it wasn't to everyone's taste, but it still had a few surprises to it. Let's see if there's anything at the very end here. What's this? There is something new. Oh, okay, that just pops open a window. Alrighty then. Thank you guys for joining me. I hope you guys enjoy my other series in the channel, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you to all the support and all that stuff. Bye, guys.